Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is July 17, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with Owen Murphy. Is that the correct way to pronounce it, Owen?
Perfect.
Where are you calling in from?
Oakland, California.
How cool is that? The first question is what is the best thing for a human being?
Peace.
Peace. What a great word. Um, what's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
The actual human experience.
Yeah, I get that a lot. That's really nice. And why do you think humans collect information?
Because I think human beings really need to know where they're going. They need a compass point. They're in the present so much, and the present is always filled with the unknown. It occurs to them in the present. And I think that it comes from our early navigational needs.
I like that. Early navigation, need to know
Yeah.
where we are. Early navigational needs. That's good. Um, do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it begins with being more innate and then becomes the part of the necessity becomes the inventive.
Yeah. Do thoughts create emotions?
Absolutely. In the
I,
in the main, I'll qualify that. In other words, I think that thoughts can, well, now we're getting into other stuff. A thought is based upon memory of experience. Now, sometimes that memory is so deep, so embedded. Like, for example, you see a snake, you don't think about what you're going to do, you just do it. But everything after that is thought related, response due to thought. That's probably a clumsy way of saying it, but that's the best I can do right this moment.
no, that's fine. That's what we're after is your hunch, your guess, your instinct, your impulse. Yeah, that's really good. And we're going to get more into memory, but a few more questions about thinking. Oh, and fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
Realize I'm thinking.
That's good. Can humans think without language?
I think they can. I think it's very possible that thinking can take place without language. Yes. Yeah. My feeling is that there has to be a process where thinking comes not necessarily related. Oh well, that's difficult. Can we revisit that? I
Say it
think
again. Yeah,
can
go ahead.
can we revisit that as a question?
Oh, yeah, you mean down the line,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, we'll come back up again. Yeah, language is important here. Can humans think without language? Yeah. We will revisit that. I love that you asked that because rarely in 40 years do people say, "Can we revisit?" They'll just say, "Let me think about that."
Right.
That's good. Um, Chomsky says language is not just words, it's culture, tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work, when language breaks down?
I find myself always looking for the space between words, images, experiences, that there is that space to go to when language breaks down. So silence, which is a very loaded sort of concept, but silence and contemplation within silence, I think, is very, very um, helpful.
Really good. That almost goes to, can humans think without language? If language means sound or, what do they call that thing? Anyways, it's like noise, a white noise, signal to noise, this thing I've heard. I don't even know what it means, but if language means some activity,
Hmm.
then if you have no activity, like the silence, then that's a strategy. Like, it's in order to understand something, we have to be without it. No, I guess the best way is saying people there's this philosopher who says we walk forward in life, but to understand it, you have to walk backwards.
Which I immediately respond to with, is he describing the process of thought related to memory?
Yeah.
And I think that
Thought
describes it quite well, actually.
yeah, thoughts relationship to memory, something I've really have not talked about a lot, but we're gonna get to our memory question, and then we can really go. Um, your general observations of humans in general, I know it's both and it depends. Are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
In my world, in the world that I live in, I feel deeply that the thinking is getting in the way of the feeling. We're in a thinking world, and the process of feeling, which relies upon a real experience as a human being to in relationship to another human being, is, I think, I feel being blocked out by, even if you're unconscious of it, there's a continual thinking process that obstructs the heart, the feeling part of us, which I believe is the heart.
It's really well put. Bridget Bardot said, "I don't think when I make love." And I'm like, "Good luck." How can you turn your brain off completely? And I mean, it is a high aspiration, but you're doing the most sensuous feeling thing, and your brain's going, it's like, "No, just, you know, surrender to the feeling."
And that is, yeah, I that's, and I think sex, the act of sexual, um, the mutual sexuality thing, or even your individual sexual experience, uh, it, it brings you to the precipice of the fear of abandoning the thinking process in order to just simply, in that one great act of freedom, that, as D.H. Lawrence once said, I think in Women, uh, when there was a moral question being put to, oh, these low class women and these men, like huddling in the dark passages of the industrial coal mining city, getting it on. And Lawrence says, you're talking about that precious moment of total freedom that they will never experience in any other way. So yeah, it's a big deal. Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Who I didn't quite get that. You said Lawrence. Who said that?
D.H. Lawrence.
Oh,
D.H.
D.H. Lawrence. Oh,
In
beautiful.
one of his novels, and I believe it was Women, and I read that when I was drunk. I read everything I shouldn't read as early as I could, and D.H. Lawrence was uh, right at the top of that list. He
You
was
mean probably Women in Love?
maybe Women in Love. Yeah, Women in Love. That's what it was, and he speaks to it in a very short blast. You're condemning the one act of freedom that people have,
Yeah,
possibly.
it's beautiful. I used to show that film Women in Love in the '70s on university campus in Ann Arbor, and I mean, that film just held up so strong.
Oh,
When
yeah.
people were struggling to figure out, now we're free from our parents, and what is sex, and, all of a sudden 2 men are wrestling.
In front of the fireplace in the drawing room. It's a great piece of work. And it was so disarming, wasn't it? It was so disarming.
It is.
Really,
Yeah,
so beautifully done. It
yeah.
was quite surprising, actually.
2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s.
Mhm.
Is thinking a function of the soul?
I don't know. That's a big question. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um, my instinct is to say that everything is an extension of the soul. That that is the inner, unimaginably immeasurable universe. It's inarticulate. So what we are as human beings, you can't compartmentalize it. So I have to say that my instinct is that thinking, whether it's understood or not, is part of the soul.
yeah,
I can't separate it out.
yeah. Oh, and you really did good because I like when people shift the words in my questions because I don't want it to be strict.
Mm.
And you said the word instead of it's a function of the soul, extension of the soul. So this is you anticipated a question like 4 or 5 down. So that was perfect. You must have ESP.
Things
The se
we all do.
Yeah, we all do. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
If we want them to, I believe, yes, they can.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I pursue meaning.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we actually creating consciousness?
I think we're a particle of consciousness. And I think that our awareness of when consciousness is at work is only when we are aware of it. But the moment that we're aware of it, if we start to sort of categorize it, that it's like the I Ching thing, the words remain and the image disappears, or the image is there and the words disappear. It's a fine moment. It's a very fine moment. I was surprised when somebody once told me, a Zen Buddhist told me, in chronological time, achievement of a real state of meditation may only be a couple of minutes, even with great practice, that it can be just in a chronological world, not a very long. I don't know whether that's accurate or true, but that's something I remember retaining. So, in relation to that question, yeah, I think consciousness is only there when you're aware of it.
Yeah. It's beautiful. You evoked some Marshall McLuhan said, "A half a truth is still a lot of a truth." So, a half a minute of meditation is still a lot of meditation.
And we have no idea, and yeah, we have no idea that when you bend time, because that's something that happens. It's an alchemy of time, right? It,
Yeah.
it alchemizes our fear-infused time, the tick between the tock and the tick. If you freeze that little space between the tick and the tock for half a minute, who knows what's happening in the brain? What's happening? I'd like to have
He
half a minute
that's
day. That would be great.
He also said, because you talked about this silence in that void or gap between the contem he said, "The gap is where the action is."
I, I feel that that is the place of deep creation. I was going to say creativity, but no, of creation.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, Jerry, but I learned so long ago. I realized nothing made sense without the spaces between things.
yeah,
Birds on a wire, they need a certain amount of wingspan between each other. They need there's a certain amount of spatial necessity. Words are unintelligible. You know, some of the great
yeah.
composers have tried to eliminate as much space as they can between them, which is extraordinary. It's like that's now you're into a subject of quantum physics. I don't know, but
Yeah.
space.
Space. My most favorite genre of music almost is funk, and George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, said,
The
"Funk
best.
is" he says, "Funk is the absence of."
What a great, great guy. I love funk. If it ain't got funk, if it ain't 80s, 90s, 70s, 80s, 90s funk, I don't know where the love is.
That's it. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Okay, I have to say speed of thought.
There's no right or wrong answers, Owen, but that one you got right. But you would be surprised, about 60 to 70% say speed of light. It's
Huh?
interesting.
Well, that's where the indoctrination is, right? Everything has been like, this is the way it is, and the
Yeah,
experts say it, and what do you know?
that's it. But, come on, we can think faster than light. I mean, it's just like, boom. I mean, it's almost like you have the thought before you even have
That's
it.
right. Yeah, it's that. Well, there's that's the extraordinary thing, isn't it? Thought. The
Yeah.
moment the experience occurs, the thought's right there. And then the thought claims the experience.
Yeah. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools."
Mhm.
But Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools." What new tool do you suggest? What new tool do you gravitate towards?
Mm. Conversation.
God, really good.
The greatest hunger that I've had in the 2 years of COVID was the spontaneous randomness of conversation with
Yeah.
the other humans on this spaceship, the other astronauts you run into. It's like, see, again, going back to the word that you used, absence of.
Yeah.
You know, you don't miss the sunlight until you have the absence of the sunlight.
Yeah. That's also Bucky Fuller said, we're all crew, no passengers.
Bingo, bingo. We are. I said it once. I said it just the other day. I walked with one of my grandsons is looking at going to college. We took him up to Cal, uh, and one of the adults behind me, they came to the astrophysics department, and the young man was really energized, who was a great guy to be with, but said, this is where people have launched out into space. And I said, well, we're already there. And the voice behind me said, no, we're not. And I thought to myself, I turned and looked at him and said, you don't feel that we're on a spaceship in space? And he stopped. Well, I guess you're right. Right. We're definitely astronauts on a spaceship in space. It's, I just don't know how people can't grasp that.
Yeah, it's good. What new toy do you suggest?
Oh, it has to be music. It has to be
Oh, wow.
music.
That is good. Oh, and you really get what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
What have I accomplished? What what did I set out with the intention to do, and how close did I come to it? Uh, I'm preoccupied by all of the worries that everybody's preoccupied with. I worry a lot about the avoidance that's taking place of the stark reality of what's going on the spaceship right now. The desire for it just to go away, and that worries me deeply. And it
Wow.
worries me and myself. I mean, we know how the spaceship operates. We know it. We are watching ourselves in every 24 hours. We're seeing the impact of the collective energy of humanity on the spaceship. We know how it works. And because we know how it works, we also, whether we're aware of it or not, we know how to fix it. And yet there's this avoidance of this fear. Maybe it's a fear of failure, maybe it's a fear, but it is the great mission of the crew. There is
Yeah,
no other.
it's
Everything
amazing.
else pales. That plus, I have to say, that plus the introduction of science of the nuclear weapon, that tool, man's a tool maker, and the great fear, all of our fear of climate warming, we can have an instant catastrophe. And yet we're sleeping with the bomb every night. And
Yeah.
I sound like when I talk about it, it's like people look at me like I'm in the 50s or the old. We designed the tool. Krishnamurti, I have to say one thing. Krishnamurti, I once spent time with Mark Lee, his secretary. I'll relate this story to you because I think it's
Please.
indicative. So we were up in Canada. We're having a weekend sharing thoughts with some of the last people who actually worked with Krishnamurti in his efforts to educate as well as he could. Anyway, Mark told me the story. He said that they were at dinner one night in Ojai and the phone rang, and he answered the phone, and it was one of the physicists at Los Alamos in New Mexico. And he was also, I believe, he was from India. I'm not sure whether he was a graduate of any of Krishnamurti's schools, but he said that he wished to speak to Mr. Krishnamurti because he had something very important to ask of him. And so Mark said, well, he's having dinner right now. And Krishnamurti overheard it and said, who is it? He said, it's one of the physicists from Los Alamos. And he said, wants to talk to you. And he said, why does he want to talk to me? But he said, I'll take the call. And he took the call. And it was an invitation to come and speak to the entire faculty at Los Alamos about their fear of what was going on under Reagan with Star Wars and making micro nuclear weapons. And so he agreed to go, and he went. And Mark said we went to Los Alamos. He said, and into this extraordinary amphitheater, that's beautiful. He said, and there were scores of the greatest physicists amassed together, all concerned with this new endeavor of the Reagan administration to update or reinvent nuclear weapons. So he went up on the stage and he sat down and he asked, what is it you would like to ask? Is there anything you want me to say? And there was a silence. And he said, and then Krishnamurti said, okay. He said, you are engaged in the activity of the complete annihilation of all life and species on the planet. Is there anything more you want me to say? And that was it. And he walked off the stage. And as he walked down, he said to Mark Lee, the greatest minds in the world, and it's hopeless. A year later, Mark said, or equivalently a year later, the same man called about the same time and said he'd love to be able to speak with Krishnamurti, but he wanted to inform that of all the people that were in that assembly at that time when he spoke, only he and two others remained. The rest had resigned. And Mark conveyed that to Krishnamurti, who said, precisely the wrong thing to do. Implying these were the brilliant minds who put it together. Who else better suited to take it apart, to dismantle it? And instead of that, they resigned. And I never forget that. That's one of those stories that it just changed me.
That is heavy because it's almost implying they thought, oh, Krishnamurti told us we're annihilating the world. We're out of here. But indeed, he said, no, they should have said, I started this. Now I have to disassemble.
That's it.
That is heavy.
Yeah.
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 And
Anyway, sorry, but
Go
that's one of the great worries, especially at this moment that I have.
But Owen, you indeed anticipate the next question perfectly because you use the word concern in your talk in your answer. Then, what's the difference between worry and concern?
What worry is a waste of time unless it has concern, which means energized action.
Yeah.
It's the invitation to action. Concern says, okay, now what are you going to do about it? What's the solution? Worry, and I'm guilty of like 90% of the time I'm lost in worry rather than genuine concern, because genuine concern would demand complete attention. And I'm like all over the place with it.
Very good. McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we might be able to learn to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So, Owen, I asked you the question McLuhan probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think it's fear. I think
Yeah.
we're afraid. I think we're afraid that we do not have the capacities, or that we are somehow, it's a measurement thing. It's a measurement. Immediately you're measuring yourself against a general call or a general alarm or a general indication. You go into a measurement on an
Yeah.
individual basis. And I think that is engendered by fear. And
Yeah.
fear paralyzes and procrastinates you.
Wow, this is like a session with my own Krishnamurti. This is pretty intense, dude.
Oh
I
no.
I listen to Alan Watts every Sunday morning, like a ritual.
Greatest laugh in the world.
Yeah, and it's like it's something special to me, and it's really I don't know how we picked Sunday, but for some reason, when I started reading your little resume you sent me, I was like, this is like a Sunday session I could ever ask for.
Well, Sunday was for me, in the ritual of I became a single dad young, and the ritual on Sunday was I didn't have to crush out the world to work. My child was waking up. I put on anything from Stevie Wonder to wake up today,
Yeah.
and then into the breakfast, which was great. And then, then it was KPFA and listening to whoever was on, but often it was KPFA that broadcast so much of Alan Watts.
Oh, they started, and then
Oh yeah,
And then in 53, KPFK in LA started broadcasting. And now we're the only, I mean, KPFK is the only one that has a regular 2 times a week play Alan Watts.
Is
You
that
know,
right? Is that K? You say KPFK?
KPFK every Sunday at 8 a.m. You could listen to it online.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
And it's just like I'm a radio person. I mean, you can go on YouTube and listen to Alan Watts till the cows come home, but I
Sure.
like the idea of something on a radio that other people are tuned to that moment. I'm just a radio person.
Oh,
I like
that's really good though. You know that the collective is there, the collective
yeah,
listening. I think that's great. What time is it on? Do you know?
8 a.m. every Sunday.
8 a.m. or 8 p.m.?
AM.
Oh, cool. Early morning. Good.
Yeah, it's early morning.
Thank you.
S So, do artists have moral obligation?
Yes.
Wow. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I'm more afraid of old ideas being dressed down as new ideas
Yeah.
or made up as new ideas. But some new ideas, uh, yeah, some new ideas do worry me. But only initially. And then if I think about them and get into them, I diminish the fear. If I simply jump away from it, then I embrace ignorance and the fear remains. And then the thought says avert, avoid, deter. You know, yeah, there is an initial. There can be initial fear around new ideas for sure. For me, like somebody was talking about autonomous cars and everything like that. That immediately worried me because I suddenly saw machines becoming infallible except when they worked. You know, I don't see 100% anywhere.
Yeah,
No 100% anywhere. So anyway,
that's it. Okay, here we go. This one's you can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
sure, I can do a number of them. So I'm in a high chair and I'm eating some gruel, and the walls are painted the way that they would be in those days, half green at the bottom and cream from about 3 foot up to the ceiling. There are 3 steps down from the door in front of me. The door opens, and a little girl with a bob cut haircut, with perfect fringe, and then down just below the ears, all the way around, what we used to call a bowl cut. And she's got a big Woolworths pink family size comb in her hand. And she steps down the 3 steps with these huge brown eyes and comes over to me. And standing in front of me, she combs my hair. And
Wow.
it was my first erotic sensation.
Oh my god.
I can remember it to this day, the wonderful feeling when people did kindness in terms of the tactile
Yeah.
touching. It just went right through my body. And I can remember that clearly. And then uh, several other thoughts that come to mind, um, some traumatic. Uh, so that was the blissful moment. Quite soon after that, I'm afraid I saw the devil, though when I tell people they don't want to know. We were a Catholic family. We were moved into 4-story flats that were built for the people that were bombed out during the Second World War from the docks and other places. And by 1949, when I was born, they began to open them up to other people. My father and mother were immigrants, and we moved into this one apartment. It later transpired that the whole place was built on an old cemetery, a plague cemetery, the Black Death. Anyway, both my brother and I experienced phenomena. I'll just put that. However, we were also in a very traumatized period of our life with our family. So I'm not sure how much that plays in, but I definitely, to this day, either in a dream state or in a real state. I remember standing we were on the first floor, and then I'm half a floor up, a stairwell, which had a green banister. And through the well between the 2 flights of stairs, a perfect Lucifer floated up right looking at me and then straight above me, and I'm just transfixed by that image. I left that place at the age of 3, excuse me, 4, and that memory I have from about the age of 2 or 3. Yeah, that was traumatic, and that always has left me with. I'm Irish, so I grew up with the Banshee. I grew up with the Second Sight. I grew up with the. My mother was the last of the Gaelic speakers in that part of the world, and didn't learn English till she had to in order to get a job. So there's a whole stream that has been put into me from that. So I'm not, I have no difficulty talking about it. I do have a difficulty of explaining it, of what it might be, of what it might have been. It's a lot of different things. And a lot of images in that early period of my life. Certainly my first going home to Ireland with my mother and father, and being laid beside the open fire on the hob of the fire, looking up through the chimney and watching the spiral of the smoke and then the stars. That was just amazing. And a fiddle player coming and playing a tune to me, and all sorts of little things like that. I have many, many vignettes from my very early child. No problem locating them at all. And when people ask me how old I was, I say, well, I really don't know if I was 2, very early.
Yeah.
And yeah, somehow
That
I
was
haven't censored them.
really well put. I really visualized everything you said by the words you described it. Owen, is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Can be both
Yeah.
simultaneous.
Tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you, just briefly, like a role model. What specifically was that impact?
Oh, I have to go to Liz, my wife, because of her amazing naturalness about, she's a school teacher, and she's not. When I say was, she's a school teacher. And when I first got together with her, what stunned me was it didn't matter what time, day or night, that a child would call her. She was always Liz to them, no matter how small they were. And they were always mi hija and mi hijo, my son and my daughter. And she never, ever hung up on a child, was cross. She listened and answered the question, whether it meant don't worry about them, well, we'll deal with it tomorrow. That amazing ability. And every day she simply had a clean, it was almost like she wiped out whatever had happened the day before. She just took the chalk up. There was a perfect blackboard every day. That completely, it seemed to be no residual angst. And every day she just started into her day with that. That really blew my mind. That really impacted me about her deep humanity, deep love.
How many years together?
Trying to think, well, we argue about that. She has me a year or 2 later, and I know it was earlier, but I'd say just to be compromised, we've been together 40, let me see, 30 years. Sorry, I have to do the math. 30 years, 30 plus years.
How do you explain the longevity?
Tenacity on her part. And on my part, I couldn't imagine not being with her. I just
Beautiful.
can't imagine it.
That is a beautiful thing. So someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was the impact?
I have to say, Krishnamurti had a tremendous
Wow.
impact on me. If you want me to, I can just tell you quickly within a couple of minutes. I had traveled in North Africa, and I met my first wife there, and we were working in Switzerland. She worked for the World Council of Churches at a very incredible moment, and I was working construction illegally under the table in order to to try to get money together to go across the world to where she was from, which was the Philippine Islands. Anyway, I hung out with some pretty interesting characters in Geneva who were very interested and centered on jazz music, which I was introduced to in Geneva and Lausanne, etc. And I would often go with them into the hills to hear Americans who had decided to defect and do their music and their creativity in either France or Switzerland. So one day somebody said, "Hey, we're going to go hear this old man up in Gstaad in the mountains. Would you want to come?" And I said, "Sure," thinking, we're going to go hear another jazz musician. Cool. Get out there, there's a huge marquee tent, walk in, the whole world is there, every age group, pretty much every demographic, kids on straw and simple chairs, a stage, one chair, and a mic. And I'm thinking, wow, what's going on? Oh, it must be a solo artist. Marco, my friend, who is two steps down from two people in between us. Marco's there, I'm here. And suddenly there's a hush, and down the outside stage right comes this old man. I mean, when I say old, I mean old, with these huge eyes that took in the entire congregation, if I might say that, climbed like an old man would up onto the stage, sat on the wooden chair, put one hand under the right buttock, one hand under the left buttock, and began to speak. And he said, we were speaking about what is a conversation. And he went into this thing which flew, I had no idea who it was, no idea, flew right over my head. And as I'm looking at him, all of a sudden, I see a shimmering halo of like fool's gold stream away from his head. And I'm thinking, wow, how did they do that? I'm looking for the lights. Wow, that looks really cool. Still not sure what's going to happen. And then I look to my left to my friend Marco, who is also looking at me and says, "Tu vois la lumière? Do you see that light?" I said, "Yeah." And I looked back and it was already fading. And he went on and spoke. And I remember he finished the conversation with, I've looked for the tape, but I've never been able to find it. He finished that particular day's dialogue or conversation with the words. And the reason I find myself doing this is because I love you. Very simple. And walked on. A year later, after many other things happened, walking through Foyle's bookstore in London, his face was on a book, and under it was Krishnamurti. And then I knew who he was. And then many adventures after that, I realized as a single parent that I could not possibly equip my son with what he would need to become a complete human being. I didn't have any family here. I was scared. So I drove to Ojai with him to bring him and present him to Krishnamurti, of course, who would answer the door and who would also accept me. So I'd say, here he is. I'll pay the money. I'm going back to work now. And, and I'll be down there. Of course, when we got to Ojai Valley, it was a wall-to-wall fire. The whole valley was on fire. And the fireman said, "You ain't going in here. There's nobody getting in here for a week." So I turned around and said, "Oh, well, fate has decided that, no, that's not the road. I got to go on with this." And the rest is history. But I stayed very close to, I read a lot. I spent some time down in Ojai a little bit. I realized how extraordinarily difficult it must have been for Krishnamurti towards the end of his life, because I don't think that he could not articulate the inarticulate, and it was so difficult. So I always felt great empathy for him.
It's really beautiful. You said you were raised Roman Catholic. Do you pray now?
Oh, yeah, I find myself in prayer without even realizing how I got there. When I go to bed at night, I think of the Lord's Prayer because it's no I, me, and my, but we, us, and ours, which is, again, a comfort. A prayer is the inclusivity of the community that you live with. Prayer is what you offer up in the best of your work. Prayer is beyond asking for something. I think prayer is really the height of prayer is giving and being given to.
Well put. If God exists, what would you want God to say to you after you die?
I'm sorry. You know, when I was 11, I had to write an essay about God. We had a very charismatic. If I'm going on too much, cut me off, Jerry. But
No, you're doing fine,
I
believe
was
me.
11 years old in a Catholic school, which in England is not the same as a Catholic school here. It's a poor school, and it's supported by the diocese and the parishes around it. I went to Our Lady of Lourdes School. Our headmistress was Miss Gruggan. She had a personality like Winston Churchill on a bad day, and a voice that would paralyze you with the words, that boy. That boy meant everybody stopped. So we had a charismatic priest. He was a Jesuit, Father French, and he, among other things, he taught us the meaning of valor, which was take the punishment of any girl who makes an error in class. The first boy that shows his hand exhibits valor. Father French was a swordsman who had studied in Toledo, and he would practice various cuts of the saber, French dragoon as opposed to British dragoon, from the saddle, or a foil, and that would be the punishment that you took for the girl. Well, it took 2 seconds for the girls to figure out how to do that. Anyway, we had rapt attention to our Father French, and one day he said, I want you all to write an essay on the absolute divinity of the Holy Trinity. I skipped home. My father was coming off a long day's work, taking off his boots. My dad laid railroad track. And I said to my dad, hey, Dad, what's the absolute divinity of the Holy Trinity mean? And he looked at me and he said, now listen, he said, will you feck off and go upstairs, he said, and open those encyclopedias and the dictionary that I carried home on my back for all of ye, and there's dust on them because not one of ye ever opened the book. So up I went and I opened the dictionary, and there it was. Absolute. A state that cannot be added to nor subtracted from. Paraphrasing it. When I sat down and began the essay, 2-3 pages in, I had decided that there couldn't be an absolute God because an absolute God wouldn't need an audience. Was it a lonely God? Was it a God that was making, how lonely was God? And how much did he need to create this other entity to be aware of him? It couldn't be absolute. So I ended up saying God was a work in progress.
Oh,
took it in, handed it in, and then Winston Churchill at the door in the personification of Miss Gruggan said, that boy, and dragged me out. My butt puckered up. Tears were already streaming. She put me against the wall in the hot corridor and she said, who wrote that essay? I did. No, you didn't. Don't lie to me, she said. Who wrote that? Was it your brother? Your father? Who was it? I did. Go back in there. 2 days later, she came back. Nice frilly blouse, well dressed. Said, Miss Wallace, would you mind if I take Owen, not that boy, out of the room? I want to talk with him. I'm taken out, still scared. She said, I'm going to ask you, did you truly write the essay? Yes. Somebody here wants to talk to you. Monsignor such and such, I can't remember. Huge guy, purple sash, silver cross, comes over to me, chucks me on the chin and said, oh, this is the young man asking questions into Mother Church far beyond his years. We want to talk to your mother and your father. We think you're having a vocation into the priesthood. Golden light of God on me. I skip home and I go into my mom. Mom, you got to come down to the school because they want me to be a priest. And my mom looked at me. She said, what? She said, they want me to be a priest, Mom. She put the 2 hands between her legs and burst out laughing. She said, how will you feck off? She says, we've no money. We've no money. You couldn't be a priest. Well, I was mortified. But she did come down to school. cup of tea, chocolate biscuit, me included. And they explained to her, well, we think Owen's having a real calling. She goes home to my dad, wait, very ceremoniously, puts his dinner down quietly, and then says to him, Owen, you have to take a day off work. Why? They're telling him he's going to be a priest. You have to go up to the Challoner School and see the canon up there to talk about him going into the seminary. And he looked at me and he said, what? Him? A priest? I said, he'll only be a Nancy boy. That was that. But he took the day off. He woke me up. He took me in. He walked me through the corridors of this beautiful building, parquet floors, wainscoting, smiling pints of Guinness. That's what we used to call the priest, with a white top, smiling away. Come on in. He said, come on in. And there's the canon, big mahogany desk, empty, one manila folder, one chair in front of it, him as bald as the desk, big glasses, I'll never forget. And he said to my dad, in a perfectly English accent, oh, Mr. Murphy, oh, good, I'm so glad you're here. Would you please sit down? I have something. My father said, no, here's the man you want to talk to. And he sits me in the chair. And he goes into this whole soliloquy about how they believe that I'm going to be a priest because of the essay. And my father's hand, I can see it, sails up beside my head like a callus from top to bottom. He says, excuse me, Father, for interrupting you. He said, I'm a very simple, straightforward man. He said, how much is this going to cost me? The minute the folder opened, and there were pencil columns, about 3 or 4, and it went rugby gear, pilgrimages, cricket gear, blah, 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 £645 per annum. And my father said, now, thank you. He said, now, let me explain to you where I am. My wife gave up her job because we had an unexpected child. That's my sister, the unexpected. And I have 2 more as big as him, and the girl's in the convent school. I'm already paying £240 a year for the eldest. And my wife has no work. I'm the only breadwinner in the house, he says, and you're asking me for 1/3 of my gross earnings. What am I to give the others? Now, you've told him he wants to be the priest. He says he wants to be a priest. Here he is. Take him in and make him the priest. And I remember the eyes behind the glasses blinked. Stunned. He said, well, if you can't see yourself to supporting your son in this, there's nothing further to talk about. And the folder closed. And I felt the immediate cut of the beam of light from God. And I'm stunned and shocked. And my dad is saying to me, come on, Owen, we're done here now. Out through the same passageway we've entered into. No more smiling pints of Guinness. Out into this windblown gravel pathway in front of this great Gothic building. Trees rocking in the wind, crows hanging on the wind, leaves going everywhere. My dad's face right up in front of me saying, did you hear what I said? No. I asked you, do you know why I go to Mass on a Sunday? No. Do you think it's because I'm afraid of that shower of crows in there? I don't know, Dad. It's not. Do you think it's because if I die, I'd be afraid I'd go to hell? It's not. Do you think it's because if I don't go to Mass, the neighbors will be talking about me? It's not. Will I tell you why I go to? Did you ever see me miss Mass? No, Dad. I go to Mass on a Sunday because it's the one time I see all of my community under the one roof. Now, come on off. We'll go to the pub and I'll buy you a Lucasade. And as we walked away, he suddenly stopped and looked at me and said, anyway, Owen, if you went in with them, you'd only come out a Nazi boy. And I said, oh, Dad, I've often thought deeply about those moments. But that's my story.
That's heavy. That was so beautiful. So well put, Owen.
Sorry if I take up time.
No, don't be sorry at all. This is what this is all about. Illustrating through anecdotes and stories is the best way to communicate. But I wanted to tell you what Harold Bloom, the great literary critic, said. They asked him, do you believe in God? And he says, my wife is an honest atheist. I am not an atheist. My attitude towards Yahweh is that I don't like him and I don't trust him, and I wish he'd go away, but I know he won't.
There's
because Because he's built into the language, and
That's
Ni
it.
as Nietzsche said, he's part of the way we think, and as soon as you use a verb involving being, you're in trouble.
There you go. That's it. It's right there. You
I
know,
thought that
there's
was
no
funny.
escape. There's no escape.
Now, do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Evil people exist, and evil also uses people.
So this is the real hidden question of that is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up with Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Mhm.
JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question, Owen, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think that that's when he means acknowledge the enemy, you acknowledge that they are the enemy, not acknowledge them in any other way. I think that's probably very true. And I agree with him. You do empower them. The moment you recognize something as being evil and you engage with it, then you have in fact given it power,
Or, yeah.
given him or her or it power. I don't know what I would advise if somebody came to me, but I've always found myself saying, you need to pull back, get away, stop communicating with it at all. And you need to find the space you need to strengthen yourself. In other words, you cannot put yourself to acknowledge an enemy is to acknowledge a vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
Your vulnerability, our vulnerability. And so without truly understanding, and I'm not good at doing this, I'm not saying that, but if without understanding the full nature, the absolute full nature of what is it that you identify as the understand the enemy. I have difficulty here when somebody says, why are you watching that particular news broadcast? Or why are you listening to that opinion or that person? And I say, because you have to know what is confronting us in this human race. You know, what you cannot ignore our history, you cannot ignore or the extraordinary struggle that human beings have put up in order to put the very best of humanity. And we're not in a great place. Not in a
Yeah.
great place.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a long winded version. I get scared when somebody talks about enemies.
Yeah. No, that was good. Don't need to apologize for long-windedness. You're this is amazing. I'm learning so much and going right back to Ireland, James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin. He ran the first movie theater there and he
That's right.
basically Volta Cinema and he basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go outside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?"
Right across the road.
And
Right
then
across the road.
and Faulkner, many years later, said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, there's two things there that I think are very important. And this comes from my own experience as a child. Saturday morning pictures in the Gaumont Cinema and 2,500 kids watching B movies, the Lone Ranger, Marvel Man, together, screaming their heads off, watching the cartoons together. I think that the movie was simply an extension of the theater. Why do we go to the theater? Why do we? Because we need to hear stories. Stories give us the comfort in the night. Stories keep us from our own individual fears because stories are usually or were the storyteller in the center involving all of the imaginations in the room. And I think that that's all that is. And yeah, I think it's become very exaggerated. But isn't it interesting that now we can have a movie experience all by ourselves at 3 in the morning? And I miss the 2,500 kids yelling and screaming for the good guys against the bad guys. But that's just me, right? And so I don't know what it would be like for my teenagers who had no experience of that. My grandchildren or my son or Liz's children who didn't have that shared experience that I had, which was, by the way, my mother's a Joyce, and my grandfather and grandmother on both sides were Joyces, and so I know very well about Joyce, and a lot of claims made, but my cousin Barnard McLaughlin swears that the great 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 grandfather was born in the house she lived in. She got away with it enough to be able to get it into the Observer magazine without being refuted. But so I know a little bit about Joyce from my own experience of the Joyces. And he was absolutely right. You know, he's one of the greatest writers in the world.
Yeah.
Tragic life, as far as I'm concerned.
We'll get into more of that. That was beautiful. So, what first attracted you to pursue? Because I know you've done many things, but it seems as though you pursued theater and you pursued union organizing. Let's say those are two major roles or careers you pick.
Yeah,
What
well,
was the tipping point to go, I want to pursue acting, theater, or are you a writer and an actor or just an actor? What?
yeah, I'm a I'm a stuck writer. I'm stuck. There's a huge volume of stuff that I need to write, but
Right.
I know I want to write, and I have to.
Yeah.
In fact, I was supposed to go to Guatemala. That fell through to do an intensive writing with a journalist that I know who was probably the greatest journalist, most sought after journalist during the Central American Wars in El Salvador, in Honduras, in Nicaragua, and in Guatemala. But unfortunately, that has, for the time being, fallen through. Yes, writer. But let's go back to the acting. Is there a tipping point? I don't see a distinction between uh, being a all the world's a stage, and we choose the roles that we play. We put on the mask we want to, and all of that. But there was a moment. I just finished work with in the Berkeley Rep and in the Aurora Theater up here, and I looked carefully at what was going on, and I realized I couldn't sustain my responsibilities without working. Working was essential to it, and I was from the working class. And I joined the union very young. Oh, well, actually not so young, but in order to get the benefits for my son and to be able to get some stability in our life and not to be the Lone Ranger up there trying to win the world. So came to a point when I went into work, I saw the absolute role was there, and that is somebody to protect the interests of the union and the workers in it um, against the consistent attempt, both within the union and externally, to subvert the contract and recognize that. And I've always known what it took for people to have the rights to a union, and it's written in blood, without exaggeration, suffering, and a tremendous amount of energy to allow the voiceless to have a voice. Not all to have a voice, but it was the best structure for working people, and probably in the United States was the best example of that. It was democratic to a large degree, et cetera, et cetera. So when it came to me doing it, I took on the role and took on the responsibility as a shop steward. And that eventually led to being um, asked to run for business rep. And after a great deal of thought, realized it was important to do it. And so for the last 8 years of my working career, that's what I did. And I retired out of that position, keep my membership. I just came from an event yesterday. Acting, I think I sacrificed the individual pleasure of acting, but I felt the role that I was called to was the most important role, and I did the best.
Owen, where did you get that sense of social justice from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
I think that came basically. I must say that my mother and father, we were immigrants. We were the only Irish family in a project housing group, and we were we were very quickly told that we weren't liked and not accepted, and there was a great deal of early understanding. But really, it was the example of the people that, my father's friends, my mother's friends, the similar the history of immigrants everywhere is very, I learned there are two types of people in the world initially: those that have to wait for the bus and those that have a choice not to wait for the bus. And it changes all the time. And I think those that have to wait for the bus are often forgotten and passed by. But I learned that I did learn my basic. I remember when I took off to go to see Salvador Dali in the 70s, with a buddy, a hippie friend of mine from great muralist, that he's gone now. But we were off to see Salvador Dali, and I was working with my father at the time, with digging mud and putting in sewage pipes down in a big army housing. Crazy scene. And I told him, Dad, I'm going to go to France and Spain with Eddie. And he took his hat off, and it's the only time I ever saw him. He cried behind a pile of bricks. I said, Dad, I'm just going for a few weeks. He said, you're going off with a shower of hippies, and you're going to lose your working class ethics. And I'd never heard those words put together like that. This is my dad. My father was a great. I love my dad. He died at 58. Worked 7 days a week, sometimes 7 days and a night. But youngest of 18 or 22 births that my grandmother had, last born and last to survive of 13 that survived childhood, and went to work at 13 in a coal mine. And was brilliant. I had a great mind. I had a great, beautiful mind. Born in the Depression. Born on the cusp of the Depression, and really suffered enormities that you and I, and thank God, will never suffer. But and did it with a great deal of dignity to the best of his ability. But brilliant guy. And so, yeah, I learned my ethics from there. But I later learned in the peace movement, in the attempt to, and you go back to Marshall McLuhan, the medium and the message. I learned at 15 that, boy, oh boy, if you aren't controlling your narrative, who's controlling your story? Who's running the ship here? And, who's creating the brilliance and the adventure of life? Every day, everywhere I looked, human hands on everything. There was nothing in the environment in the city that wasn't touched by a human hand, created, and they were castigated. And then this myth of the middle class came into the world, I heard it yesterday when somebody said, we're the middle class. No, you're not. God damn hell you are. What's gone wrong with you all? You bought the bait that to be working class is not to be. And that is the greatest problem right now confronting people in this world.
Yeah.
Well, our world, anyway. Anyway, I'm rambling.
Yeah, Owen. Usually when I tear up in the middle of one of these interviews, I know it's working. I've teared up 3 times, and the last one, it like doubled tears. It was really beautiful how you put that. What's the difference? And I thank you. What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
There is none. You can't be right without taking responsibility. How do you do that? How can you do that? I am confounded by my cowardice sometimes, my innate cowardice, this self-preservation, not saying not going to the truth of what I believe immediately, but actually, measuring and taking the tangents, and I hate that part of me. I hate that part of me, which I call the political part of me. But then again, you have to think beyond. I'm accused of being very selfish. I'm not selfish enough. That's my belief. Selfish meaning that it is coming from my deep self.
Wow. What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Rebellion is an act of great anger against a situation. It is the result of compression released. Revolution is at best put, the problems of the earth are enormous, and it needs an aspirin the size of the sun. It needs an absolutely deep education, and I use that word advisedly, not indoctrination, education. And I believe that we're going into another realm now of the enormous capacity of a human being to be free, to understand how important it is to be free. And
Yeah.
the foolish word, I mean, I know it's getting into the esoteric, etc., but no, you know, to be able to teach children how to deal with fear, how to deal with, it's very hard for me to actually speak to this, and there are people that can say it much better, no, much better. When you see how much pressure there is on children in this world to be right, to think right, to act right. That word of act right, you know, act this, act that. Don't hear it too much anymore, but there was a real understanding when I was a kid that what you portrayed was a reflection of where you came from and who you were.
Yeah.
Any adult, well, I've got up to all sorts of tricks, but I remember adults saying, "Come here, you. I know your father. I know your mother, and they're good people. What are you up to? What are you doing?" And it was like immediate. It was like, there I am. It's hard for the children. The message has been torn away from we're living in a world of total work or no work. You know? The
Yeah.
children are not, the children don't like that. Liz and I sit here sometimes, and there's one family on this street as children, and they laugh and play, and you see them acting out their imaginations. The rest of the street is blank, and blind, and dumb. That is like, that's the bird song right there. That's the joy. So for me, it's the children need to be able to come out into the fields. They need to be able to come out into the fields and pick fruit. The children of the farm workers, uh, I, who have a sense of community or a sense of where they come from, that collectivism that we all sprang from there. I'm sure that you would tell me about your parents and grandparents, it would be much the same story.
Yeah.
The
You're
ingredients,
absolutely
the ingredients are absolutely almost universal. Children play together. Children imagine together, talk together, and we need to learn from them. Hard times. These are hard times.
yeah.
These are hard times.
No, you tapped into a lot there. Utah Phillips, a great folk singer, also a political activist, said, Anarchy is making rules for yourself, not others.
That's right.
Who's entitled to make the rules?"
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting country. I think that in Utah, I met him in an airport just briefly, coming back from the SOA watch. Uh, I really think, honestly, that children's needs. When you're listening, and I learned this through Liz. You can't spoil a child if you're giving them what they really need. If you're listening to what they need. And so I think that great listening to the needs of people create the rules. I do. I know that sounds purist, but it is true. If you really are listening, it's not different from acting, is it? Acting is the art of listening.
Yes. Music too is
Oh,
that's listening, the listening to our needs. Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
that's a tough question for me to answer. It is a tough one. Conviction is terribly important But compromise is absolutely more important because your conviction may convince you, but doesn't do anything for perhaps anybody else. So compromise.
Yeah.
Compromise without losing your convictions. So
Yeah.
you simply cannot compromise. For me, like I'll just be blunt with you, you can't compromise with fascism. Doesn't happen.
Whew.
There is
You're
no
not Owen, you're knocking them out of the park. These are amazing. That one is an interesting. That's my first question I started off with 40 years ago. And 80% of people say conviction's more important. And I love it when someone says compromise is more important. But I got to tell you, my one friend said, depends on what you mean by important.
That's an even greater I mean, there you go. Important for what, to what? Yeah. I mean, I didn't hear that word, and yes. Yeah, important to whom? To what?
Yeah.
I
But
mean,
but your general philosophy, I saw you as being, yeah, compromise is more important because I think it's evident. We're all born convicted. I mean, everybody's like indoctrinated immediately. And that's
wait a
a
second.
question.
You're saying we're all convicts.
Well, it's like you love the wordplay of
Oh,
Joyce. How about
you oh,
constitution? We're conned into believing the Constitution,
yeah,
But,
exactly.
it's interesting because, like, I have, like, 8 topics I'd love to do a whole salon with you because we only got about 15 more minutes this
Okay.
time, so in the future, I really would love to do another one with you and maybe get, Augustine and a couple others and
Oh,
even
yeah,
go a lot deeper because this has been amazing, but I did wanna ask you a couple more here.
sure.
Um, T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Poetry.
Wow. So what is the function of poetry?
It is the well of the it is the mystical well that we draw from, uh, we draw the very it is the alchemy. It is the transitional. It is the extraordinary. It
Yeah,
is, it is, for me, it's poetry is T.S. Eliot. In my end, in my beginning, there is my end.
that's it.
It is poetry. Everything that we have done, everything we do has come from the imagination,
Yeah.
from the story around the fire, from the listening to what I mean. Think about it. What happens when chronological time dies? The human being who gets to stand in a swaying, wind-blown posture of grass, simply without the interruption of time. What's in that mesmerizing moment?
Owen, Louis Bersani just died, a lit crit, talked about Mallarmé's poetry. And I'm curious of your thoughts on this one line, because
Mhm.
it seems as though it could apply to everything that you've been talking about, including theater and social justice. He says, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
It's uh, it's clearly it's a wonderful way of disarming the fear of loss of the extraordinary power of the word. It
Yeah.
disarms it completely. That's a great line. I
Yeah.
just read a poet. I'll give you a poet that I just came across, the poet laureate of Colorado, a young man named Bobby Lefebvre, Lefebre. I just found a poem perchance attached to something else, and I spent an hour and a half before I even left my bed yesterday reading his poetry. And he is absolutely confronted with that dilemma of the loss of poetry, and he's turned it into the poem.
Yeah. Yeah, and Gary Snyder I love his. My task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then putting that seeing into language.
That's yeah. Ah,
But you brought up something about story. Great filmmaker Hollis Frampton said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Owen, can you forget to die?
oh yeah, sure, absolutely. No, that's not even. We spend so much of our time measuring the distance between our death and ourselves. We get bored with it. After a while, until pain, comes into it, and suffering and longing and all those measurements. But yeah, sure, you have to. You
Yeah.
have.
Is perception reality?
Yes, it has to be your reality.
Yeah. In your creativity, in your engaging with the world, which you've articulated so well here, tell me one major element that stayed the same and one major element that's changed.
The one, I guess, if I've listened to you correctly, this is my answer. Um, the basic commonality of needs of human beings to live in a world. I would put them down to five things, very simple things, but they're very simple. Peace. But in order to have peace, you must have education, health care, a roof over your head, and a place within your community.
Yeah.
And you can't have those four without peace.
Yeah.
And the thing that has changed, the element, is that what you said?
Yes.
Mhm. Taking myself too personally and not lightening the fuck up. I've learned to lighten up a little bit. I'm very hard on myself, and so I'm learning to accept my flaws and bumblings and clumsiness a little bit better,
Yeah.
and my anger, because the anger doesn't do very much. The anger
Yeah.
doesn't.
Well, but the bumbling reminded me of how Buster Keaton taught us how to turn a stumble into a dance. It's like,
The
so
most
you
amazing, most. Just watch his face through it all. Look at the impassivity, and yet he's going through this amazing intricacy, and it's like it's brilliant.
So Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength, rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness.
Right.
Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Fear. My fear. I'm afraid of something, and therefore I will avoid it or procrastinate. No, I'm afraid of something. Let me look at the facet of fear.
Yeah.
Let me look at the multifaceted nature of the fear. That is what I think. I think that I really try to look at my fear and fear in general,
Yeah.
which is the great obstruction. I think the great obstruction. Fear of
Anger.
fear of not having, fear of being, fear of not being. Endless.
Yeah. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
When you take action on the anger without cruelty.
Yeah. You're sure a wordsmith, my friend. That is some great words you've been using. So we've got about 5 more minutes.
Wow. Could go on for this
Class.
a while.
How do you find peace of mind, Owen?
Oh, shadows on the wall, listening, listening to the flickering of leaves outside, birds sitting under the shade of an. Somehow we got a miraculous black walnut tree that sprung up in the backyard and is now 40 feet tall, and the canopy comes all the way down to the ground. And sitting underneath it, the squirrels chew off the immature walnuts and drop them right over your head, just to let you know it's their territory, but yours. That's a big
Oh,
deal.
if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, go off and play some more.
5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head
Okay,
in a few words. Who started it all?
you did.
Are we going to make it?
Maybe
Where do we put it?
wherever you want.
Who's cleaning it up?
You better. Nobody else wants to.
Is it serious?
Of course, it's not.
We gotta do a high five Zoom. That was amazing. Okay, we're done with Alan, just a few more. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
God damn it. Until they started asking that bloody question, I never thought about it. Now I'm forever still experimenting with it and timing myself and wondering how many grasps it takes to grab it. Damn it.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what title would it be?
Through the bottom of the glass.
They wanna scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Pine.
What?
Pine.
Oh, pine. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
That's a good one. Oh, in a small farmhouse somewhere. Uh, yeah, you can make it out of anything that comes off the land, including the cow pies.
Nice. That's good. Well, you definitely just anticipated the next question. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Say thank you. Well, I mean, the vomit, yeah, maybe it would alter the smell and give me some relief for a moment. Yeah. No, yeah, no, I think that's what I'd say. Well, thanks.
No, thank you's a beautiful answer. Owen, tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Fame.
Dude, the 3 answers I get the most: fame, money, and heroin.
Oh, wow.
It's heavy.
Oh, wow.
What is the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
It has the absolute revelation, in spite of the amount of propaganda against the collective indignation of people born in this time to go along with the program.
To go along with the what?
The program, that they question the program. That is hopeful. As long as that goes on, you know, I, Chomsky once said, I was present in 2003 when somebody asked a question about speaking truth to power. And he put his hand up. He said, in the interest of the brevity of time, I understand the concept. It's Quaker. It comes from the Quakers. That if a human being was in error. If you point the error out to that human being, the natural inclination is to realign and do the right thing. He said, I have no interest in speaking truth to power, but in speaking truth as facts, not beliefs, to the powerless. And that was a profoundly important thing that I needed to hear.
It's beautiful. Louis Buñuel said, "I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it."
Wow, that's a great. That should be a. For me, I should. I'm going to put that up somewhere. That's amazing. Buñuel said that.
Yeah, but it also begs because, 99% of people say, "That's great." But one person said once, "That was good." He challenged it. He says, "Nope, that's bullshit," because you're implying that why are you seeking truth if you're gonna not really find it? So it begs this question: if the cliche goes, the journey is more important than the destination, why do we have to seek a destination or even name a destination if the journey's more important?
But the destination is not truth. The destination is inevitably death, and that's the truth.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's a mask in a sense. Again, it's that layering of the fear of things. I think right now,
Yeah.
I'll probably change my mind when it starts to get hot in the kitchen. I'll be clasping. I'm sure I'm just a human being. I'm going for the straws. They'll float, and I'll grab. I'm not. But really, the truth. So, the truth is what's happening to you.
Yeah. But I like when earlier you said embrace ignorance, and I learned from studying Frank Zappa for 50 years, he taught me to embrace contradiction.
Who is that? Zappa?
Yeah, Frank Zappa, because
Oh,
he has a great Zen line in one of his songs. He goes, "Nothing is what I want."
wow. What a wow, great words. Nothing is what I want. Yeah, isn't that true though? It's a
Yeah,
it's a deep hunger.
yeah. It's
Why do we want
embracing it's
why do we
embracing contradiction. Yeah. And see,
yeah,
what you've impressed me most is you've admitted, I fail. Like, humans are too proud to admit they fail, and it's like, that's the most human thing is to fail.
yeah.
But they wanna go, "Well, I didn't,"
It's a measurement thing. It's all that measuring. It's all what's the permissibility of what's measurable, what's this over that. And all we are is everything that ends with ing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, Bucky Fuller again, "I seem to be a verb." Yeah.
Continually.
2 more and we're outta here, Owen. This has been truly enlightening. Better than Alan Watts this morning.
Well, that's pretty heavy to take away, but okay.
I am sincere, I'm told. So this is Thornton Wilder in 1928. He said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time."
Ha,
You've laid your cards on the table for an hour and a half. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
doing your best.
Yeah. Last question. Thank you. What gives you the most optimism?
When I look into the eyes of my grandchildren who are telling me how it is in their world.
Yeah. That's the answer I get the most is youth. And that's the beautiful thing because the interview questions are full circle. The first question is what's the best thing for a human being? I learned that from my friend who studied Wilhelm Reich.
Oh yeah,
She said the answer is other human beings.
of course.
And then the last question is the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And they asked him, "What gives you the most optimism?" And he said, "Other people."
There you go. It's true. We're sick and tired of ourselves most of the time. You know, always looking for what? We're looking to play like we played.
Yeah.
That extraordinary language of that other land, that other land.
So beautiful, Owen. I really appreciate this. It's truly been enlightening. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can talk and be together forever and ever.
Bless you. Thank you so much. Been wonderful. Real great
Thank,
privilege. Thank you. Bye.
thanks, thanks, Owen.